Welcome back to another episode of the Mililani Minute. As you know, we have been going through a series on the attributes of God. These are 15 attributes that we'll spend a couple weeks on as we go through them each day. Some of these attributes we are just barely scratching the surface on. Today, we will be talking about God's sovereignty, and this is no exception to that. In a 5 to 7 minute video, there's only so much that we're able to share about these attributes and about who God is, but I do hope that in the short time that we're able to spend with you, that these are an encouragement to you, that they encourage you to not just grow in your faith, but continue learning, continue growing in your understanding and in your wisdom of the things of God. And so today, as I said, we will be talking about the sovereignty of God. And so that's what I want to talk about. So let's get started. When we use the word sovereignty, we look at that and we think, maybe that's a word that we don't fully understand, but it's not a word that we don't use. It is a word that's used often. We talk about sovereign nations. We talk about not going into or affecting a sovereign country. We talk about the sovereign king who oversees his kingdom, who rules with authority. We understand that word, and so it's not much of a stretch when we recognize that God is sovereign. We do understand that he is in control, that he is ruling, that God is the supreme or ultimate authority. I do want to look at a few verses as we understand what exactly is God sovereign over. So I want to take you to Ephesians 1, verse 11. Paul says, in him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will. So how does God work through things? How does God orchestrate or ordain things? Well, he ordains things to work together to carry out his will, his plan. Only a supremely authoritative God, a God who is in control, who oversees and directs all things, is able to make sure that all things work together for his plan to be accomplished. And so Paul is explaining that to the Ephesians, but Paul goes on to the Romans and explains this in Romans 8, verse 28. He says, and we know, for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. And so not just things working together for God's plan, but also things are working together for your good. And so God, for those who love him and are called according to his purpose, he is going to work all things together for your good. So not just his overall plan throughout creation and through the world, but also for you individually. The God who created you is intimately aware and intimately involved in the daily workings of your life. Why? Because he wants to work all things together for your good. Now, of course, what is that good? That good is to be like Christ, based on the context of Romans 8. Matthew 10 says, are not two sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. But even the hairs on your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, for you are of more value than many sparrows. God cares about his creation. He cares about the birds. He cares about knowing the intimate things about how many hairs are on your head. He knows the things that no human can know. So without getting too far into God's omniscience, which is another video coming later, but we do recognize that God knows all things, and he has to. If he doesn't know all things, he certainly can't be sovereign over all things. If a bird does not fall from the sky without God knowing, then surely you, who are worth more than many birds to God, you are worth more than many birds. Surely nothing will happen in your life that God does not A, already know about, and B, already have a plan to work out, not just his will, but for your good. Paul goes on. We've read from Ephesians and Romans. I want to take you to Colossians 1, verses 16 and 7. It says, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So God is not just sovereign over his own plans. He's not just sovereign over your life. He's not just sovereign over the birds and the things that he knows, the knowledge that he has, but he's also sovereign over everything. And so Colossians helps us to understand all things, whether in heaven or on earth, all things, whether invisible or visible, whether thrones or dominions, whether they're rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. Everything exists for a reason. God is sovereign over all of those things. So then that leads us to question, why did bad things happen? If God is sovereign, why did bad things happen? And what I can tell you is that I don't fully understand exactly why all these things continue to happen. But what I know is that because of God's sovereignty, I trust that he has a plan, that even in the things that he allows, that he hates, the things that he hates, yet he allows, he has a plan to work through those things. And through his sovereignty, not only does he have a plan, but he will make sure that he gets the glory, that it is used to make you like Christ, and that he will continue to remain sovereign. Now, the next thing that we need to be careful about thinking is that, well, if God is so sovereign that he just orchestrates everything, then maybe he's impersonal. Maybe he's just some sort of mechanical engineer, and we're all just robots. Well, I would caution against that line of thinking, because God is very clear in his word that we as humans have a responsibility to obey, to accept, to follow, to trust. We have our own ability to choose or not to choose. Now, there's a lot of theology that goes into us getting to the point of being able to choose. But without going into all of that for today, what I want to help you to understand is God did not create you to just be a robot. He created you for fellowship, but most importantly, he created you for worship. And when you freely choose to worship him in your daily life, recognizing that the sovereign God who created all things, who is working through all things, and that has the ability to make you like Christ despite all of these things that are happening. When you realize that that's the God you're worshiping, it enhances your worship, because you know you are truly worshiping the one and only true sovereign God. Now, there's a lot that we discussed, and there's so much more that we could talk about. And I would encourage, if you have more questions about the sovereignty of God, either comment below or send us a message. We would love to maybe get on Zoom, or when things open back up, we can sit down over a cup of coffee and talk through some of these things. But this is just barely scratching the surface. But again, I do hope it was an encouragement to you. I hope you have a wonderful day.